Hey guys, what is up? Public here back with another video, and today we're going to go over all the changes in patch 11.02. This was kind of a surprise in the sense of how much actually came in this little micro patch, kind of in the middle of pre-patch. We've been testing out these changes on beta for the last couple of weeks, so I'm going to kind of go over these and some implications here. There's a lot of kind of big changes that I wasn't super expecting, at least on the scale of pre-patch, so let's dive in. Alright, so I already kind of previewed some of these changes already in a previous video, but now that things are live, I'm going to kind of go over them all again just to kind of get everyone back up to speed on what went live, what's been changed, and all that good stuff. So, first of all, they have been doing some just general tuning across the board with our class tree. Not a whole lot of this is pertinent to us as Shadow Priests, really no changes here. There's a couple good bug fixes in here that they note about, like Halo not, damaging enemies out of combat. This is actually a really big one for Archon specifically in the War Within, since Halo is so central to our gameplay. They've not only fixed it to where Halo won't damage enemies that you're not in combat with, it also doesn't hit enemies that are in that kind of RP combat state. If you're in like Siege of Borealis or Dawn Light, there's a couple dungeons that have just mobs fighting each other off in the background. Well, before, Halo would hit them. So now that's no longer happening, which is great. If we move on here, and the other kind of big one that, again, took us a little bit by surprise, they did make manipulation a 1-point talent inside of our class tree. If you're not sure, this is the talent that reduces your damage taken by enemies that have your Shadow Word Pain active. So it's now just a 1 point. You still get the full 2 points of value. Unfortunately, this has broken talent builds because of this. I think by the time this video goes up, all the talent builds in like the Discord or Icy Veins guide should now all be updated to from this change. But yeah, if you're wondering why the build links were kind of broken for a day or two, it's because of this. You had to move that class tree point elsewhere if you were putting both points into manipulation. Okay, so let's move on to Shadow. So had a little bit of balancing here, and again, keep in mind with balancing in pre-patch is just kind of it's a terrible job. There's really nothing good to do here in the sense of, well, you don't want to have perfect balance for pre-patch if it costs you good balance for first season of War Within. So, and you can tell like that's where their focus is. And we have noticed that Shadow has felt a little bit under par, particularly in like a raid environment. So this is just in general, they're trying to buff our damage. You can clearly see that that's what they're trying to do. So they gave us all damage increased by 3%, is what we saw earlier. They did knock down Dark Ascension a little bit, and I suspect this was aimed at trying to make Void Eruption more viable, specifically for something like Void Weaver, which doesn't prefer running it. Unfortunately, this still doesn't seem to be enough, even after we've done lots of changes. Void Weaver still prefers Dark Ascension, and Archon still prefers Void Eruption by quite a big margin, like 5% plus. In addition, they also buffed Mind Flay damage and Mind Spike damage by 50%. This is just the base damage of those filler spells. The empowered spells were not uniquely buffed, so Mind Spike Insanity did get 15%. Mind Flay Insanity was not changed from like a damage perspective, but DPS wise, they now do Mind Flay Insanity does damage in 1 GCD. So what we talked about earlier, this is where Archon in particular is going to be a big Mind Flay Insanity build, and just kind of pump a lot of good damage. And then we also have this change, which makes it, again, play nicer for Archon in particular, where Mind Flay Insanity and Mind Spike Insanity now accumulate up to 4 charges. So, in particular with Archon, if you were just starting out your cooldowns, you had pressed Halo, you're generating, like every 5 seconds, you get a Mind Flay Insanity or Mind Spike Insanity. Couple that with already pressing Devouring Plague, and it was quite easy to kind of build this up, especially if you were also trying to weave in Void Torrent or other spells in the kit. This just makes this play much easier and less punishing for players. So Archon should be less of a hurdle to get into as a hero talent in the War Within. They also changed it to the buff now lasts for 30 seconds. Again, just increasing the kind of wiggle room you have here to use this. For most players, you're not going to hit 4 stacks very often just because, well, at the end of the day, you have to press something. But this does mean you're not going to be super pressed to use your Mind Flay Insanity cast as fast as you possibly could before. Now you kind of just need to fit it in where you can, so you can still weave in your Mind Blast, make sure you put that on cooldown, put Void Bolt on cooldown, throw a Void Torrent in there, and you really only need to like rush casting Mind Flay Insanity when you have like 3 or 4 stacks in the opener. And again, usually outside of that won't happen very much. And they also buffed Mind Spike Insanity's, the actual insanity that Mind Spike Insanity gives you by from 8 to 12. So you can tell they're trying to put more value into Mind Spike. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to have brought it quite up to par to where Mind Flay is. Mind Spike across the board doesn't seem like it's going to get used very much. Void Weaver, again, it is playing Dark Ascension, so you would kind of assume that it likes Mind Spike. While it does have a preference a little bit, it is so within margin of error, it really doesn't matter at all, so you can play whichever one you feel more fun playing with. That being said, I don't know kind of what their goal is here. In my opinion, if a build is taking Dark Ascension, it should lock in Mind Spike. Like that should be an easy pairing, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case right now. However, Archon, we flipped that over to that. There were a couple bugs that were making Mind Spike just not as strong, and unfortunately, this is nowhere near enough. Even with those bug fixes and these buffs, Archon is still quite heavily locking in Mind Flay. And mostly that's not necessarily because of Flay versus Spike. It's actually because of Mind Spike versus all of the other talents in that middle section. We have so many 2-pointers, that section is a little crowded, and those talent points are just really strong with Void Eruption builds, and it's hard to give those up. In addition, they also buff Mind Blast by 30%. Mind Melt stacks 3 times. We talked about this before, and the Critical Strike goes up by 30% each time. So again, these changes did not really do what we thought it would. Mind Spike's still not that great. And again, with the buff to base Mind Blast, you're effectively nerfing Void Blast relative to that. So what I mean by that is Void Blast is not as strong compared to regular Mind Blast now. So they seem to kind of do this, and again, they do the same thing with Mind Spike and Mind Flay, with the goal of making hero talents less of a bump up from the base kit of the spec. Not quite sure why they did that, but that seems to be their goal. And then moving on, Idol of Cthulhu, this was plaguing Prepatch for several weeks. I can now say on live servers, Idol of Cthulhu is mostly working. If you rewind time and go back before Prepatch, it's more or less has the same functionality of like how it works as it did before, but they've now since nerfed it a little bit, so it deals damage a little bit slower. You get 5 less ticks of damage, but it does tick a little bit more, and you get 5 less insanity per proc of Idol of Cthulhu. So overall, this is a nerf to the talent. It was arguably one of the strongest talents in our build, especially for PvE. But is what it is. Unfortunately, Idol of Cthulhu is still not scaling with Phantom Reach. If you're not aware, Phantom Reach is a talent that goes, your range is 40 yards up to 46 yards. Currently, if you stand too far away, and Idol of Cthulhu, kind of usually spawns like diagonal back behind you or whatever, it'll get 1 tick off and then sit there and do nothing if the target stays that far away. So that is still bugged out. So for the meantime, be conscious of your positioning. If you really don't need Phantom Reach, I would just say just don't talent it for now. And if you don't talent it, you should never get into that situation. But that is still plaguing Void Tendrils as of right now. But as far as like not dealing damage at all or pulling random stuff in combat, that appears to have been fixed. All right, so the big reason why I wanted to make this video again was because of a random change that they threw in, I think based on feedback. A few weeks back on the forums, myself and others kind of commented that we're in this kind of awkward state from a pre-pull insanity rotation. In particular, on live before hero talents, we were relying on Divine Star or Shadow Crash to build up insanity before a pull starts to make the opener feel smooth. What I mean by that is we wanted to get to that 25-ish insanity threshold, because that's what your insanity decays to when you go into combat if you have more than that. Because that gets you to your first Devouring Plague faster. Now, for most builds, in practice, this doesn't actually change what we're going to do inside of an opener, but it is basically just a straight up nerf to the spec in that now, Divine Star and Shadow Crash do not generate insanity outside of combat. So yeah, definitely a big loss here, especially for any builds that were able to take Divine Star. We brought this up because Archon just simply can't take Divine Star, and it was always using Halo. So it kind of felt like Archon was always at a disadvantage compared to Void Weaver, because Void Weaver could do this. Ultimately, I don't think this was healthy anyways. Spamming Divine Star kind of out of combat before a pull starts wasn't fun either. But I think we wanted something to help make the opener feel smooth. So what I was asking for in the forum feedback post was, can we get something that passively generates our insanity up to 25 or 20 or something outside of combat? Balanced Druids have a talent that does this, and then some, because I think it's a talent. Warlocks just have this baseline, so they just generate up to 3 soul shards outside of combat. So I think what I really wanted was something like that for Shadow, to bring Archon up to Void Weaver and kind of remove the requirement or whatever to press Divine Star. They went the complete opposite direction, so now the Divine Star doesn't generate insanity at all outside of combat. Shadow Crash does, but then if you're not in combat by the time the crash lands, it refunds that insanity from you. So it is a little bit awkward, and that did kind of catch me off guard when I first tested it. But what this means is, instead of bringing Archon's Prepull up to where Void Weaver was, they actually just brought Void Weaver down to where Archon was. So, which, you know, kind of unfortunate. The only caveat here is Void Weaver is still a bit ahead, ironically. They did not change Halo, and I think, again, it seemed like they were just hyper-focused on Archon. Archon would never press Halo before combat starts, unless it's doing, like, really crazy pulls or something else like that. It always wants to do it when combat starts, right before its cooldowns, to get that Resident Energy debuff uptime in a good spot. But Void Weaver is not in that case, and since Halo doesn't pull enemies in combat, it can still use Halo pre-combat for 10 insanity. So Void Weaver went all the way down from 24 insanity down to 10, and it's kind of pure single target build. And then if it happens to be taking Shadow Crash, you can add 6 on top of that. So if you're taking Shadow Crash and Halo, you can get up to 16 pre-pull, which, you know, it's not 24, but it is, you know, worse. But again, most times you're not taking Shadow Crash, so that's kind of sad. And if it's just single target, I mean, 10 insanity is something, but I don't know, it's still kind of a crappy solution. Like, you're going to get weird looks from your group like, hey, why are you pressing Halo before we've actually started combat? So, yeah, really, I think a disappointing change on my end. They clearly identified this as a problem, but their solution here was to kind of kneecap our insanity in a way that I don't think feels fun. Coupled with, we didn't get any reasoning out of this. They just kind of threw this in the patch notes. I think it would have gone a long way if they agreed with us and saying, hey, we recognize this is a problem. We want to give you guys a talent or some passive spell to do that kind of outside of combat insanity generation, but we just don't have time to do that right now, and we're going to do that in a future patch. If they came out and said that, I would still be a little disappointed, but at least I would know that, okay, hey, something's coming in the future. We have to deal with this for now because they recognize it as a problem, but we'll get something in the future to fix that. We didn't get anything like that. There was no blue post comment here. The communication here was horrible. They literally just dropped this onto the beta. At the time, there wasn't even patch notes saying that they did this. We just had to discover it ourselves. So really looking forward. I hope they can make a change here, or like add some communication, make a change here to make this better, because right now it's just kind of disappointing. And this did actually end up being a nerf to Void Weaver because we lost this. So let me know what you guys think. I'm curious if maybe I'm just alone on my thoughts here on the pre-pull stuff. Maybe you guys don't think it's that big of a deal, but yeah, there it is. So these are all the changes we have for 11.0.2. I don't suspect we're going to see many other like functional changes between now and the launch of the game, although there might be some small number tweaks here and there. I don't expect we're going to get like reduced points in the class tree or spec tree or anything else like that, but we'll see what's going on. That's all we have for this in this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.